Your Property Podcast comes to you with thanks to our friends at Trafalgar Square Finance, leading independent specialists in mortgages and all types of property finance. Whether it's buy-to-let, development or bridging finance, Trafalgar Square can help you organise your funding for your next property project. Exclusively to listeners of Your Property Podcast, Trafalgar Square offer a free one-to-one consultation. So whether you are a portfolio landlord looking to raise funds on your existing portfolio, or if you're just starting out and want to find out if you are eligible for a buy-to-let mortgage, Trafalgar Square Finance can help. It's easy to book with one of their experienced consultants by simply visiting yourpropertynetwork.co.uk/finance. You can find this link in the show notes for more details. Hello and welcome to Your Property Podcast. My name is Michelle Cairns and today we've got with us Carly Houston. Hi Carly.
Hi Michelle, how are you doing?
Great, thank you. Good to have you with us today. And we've known each other quite a few years, passing through different networking meetings and across the property educational world. So it's been great to kind of follow your progress and what you've been up to. So for people who don't know about your journey and yourself, do you want to give us a quick background just about how you got into investing?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me. So I got into property seriously back in 2013, whatever that is, 7, 8, 9, whatever. 9 years ago or something like that. I thought we were losing track of time with the whole COVID thing, but I had bought an investment flat in 2009, but it was very, it wasn't with any sort of professional mindset. So it was in 2013 when I got into it seriously, and it was alongside my sister Kirsten, who some people might know as well. We decided we really wanted to make a step change in our life. I was in a job that wasn't fulfilling me, and my sister was commuting every day. Like we both live in the south coast, on the Brighton Hove area, and my sister was commuting up to London every day, and I was just, as I say, in a job that I wasn't fulfilled in. So we were looking to kind of make some kind of change, and we decided to get into property together. And that was really nice. We wanted to work together as well. So that's kind of where it started. And we didn't have any money to invest, and we didn't really know what we were doing either. We had very little experience, so we just set about educating ourselves. We knew we wanted to go down a route where we were housing more vulnerable people, so that was very much the mindset that we started with, and looking for the different business models that we could do that, where we could actually still make a profitable business but help people at the same time. And that was our focus from very early on. Also, as I said, we didn't have any money to start with ourselves, so we had to also start working with investors from day one. We joined the Property Mastermind program in 2013, did that for a year, which was great, a great learning, and we were able to obviously go out to investors, show that we were educating ourselves and build our portfolio from there.
Right. Well, let's just dive into that part that you just mentioned then about not having any money from day one. And I think this is something that certainly people who are new to the property education world, it's a bit of an eye-opener, and some people, quite skeptical whether, it's possible, how it all works, and just getting their heads around how they personally would work with investors. And we said, plenty of people, and obviously myself and yourself, you just said there, started out with no big pot of funds, no inheritance, nothing, no equity, just to invest. So we had to be creative from day one, and work with other people. So that can come in many forms, and you're going to be writing an article in the YPM magazine, which is due out in October, about borrowing responsibly. So I'm sure, from the very beginning, do you want to just talk about your mindset around borrowing, from that kind of newbie perspective?
Yeah. And it is a scary thing, and it is difficult to get your head around. But I mean, as I'm sure lots of your listeners and readers have heard being said many times, no matter how much money you start out with, you're going to have to use other people. It's going to run out at some point, and you're going to have to use other people's money. You know, if you are looking to build, you know, a sort of business, a property business that you want to be sustainable, that you want to grow to a certain level, you know, if you've got you know, people that have got quite a lot of funds to start out with, maybe they don't need to, maybe they're going to build their portfolio slowly over time, and then that's fine, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think most of the people that are in our community are looking to build that serious business, and therefore, you know, it is something you need to get your head around. And I think, you know, I do think that the first thing is to really think about it, that you aren't just going out asking for handouts, that it is about finding a way where you're offering people an opportunity, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. You know, of course you're getting something out of it, you're able to use other people's money to build your property portfolio, but also they're getting something out of it as well. So whether you're doing joint ventures and they've got a share of the property and you're kind of sharing that risk and reward for the long term, or if you're borrowing funds, then obviously you're giving them a fixed interest, which is going to be a lot better than they're getting in the bank. So so in terms of that sort of skepticalness, you know, I think actually there are a lot of people out there with funds that maybe don't know what to do, and because I think a lot of people think, well, why wouldn't they just do it themselves? Well, some people, they don't necessarily have the knowledge, and a lot of people just don't have the inclination. You know, they might have a job, they might work, you know, full time, they just don't have the time to learn how to make the money work for them. And actually they're leveraging you as much as you're leveraging them, because they're leveraging your time and your knowledge and your skills. And so because we started out with none of our own funds in the beginning, we did have to get our head around that quite a lot. I mean, I coach and mentor a lot of people now, and actually sometimes the people that start out with a pot of money, even, you know, it takes them a lot longer to get their head around it, because they can't sort of fathom that, making that next step into using other people's money. And also the deals that you do have to be different. So a deal that you might do with your own money, a deal might work if you're using your own money in terms of the returns and the cash flow that it's giving you. But actually, if you're using other people's money and you start factoring in the interest you're going to be paying them, and the fact that you've got to pay that money back, then it's a very different type of deal that you need to look at. And I think that's something, you know, that's important to mention. But now I'm trying to remember your original question, just that, how did we get around that mindset?
Do you want to talk to us about like the first loan that you can remember doing, the first kind of big one? What you know, because it can be a bit daunting when you think of, you know, how much money, especially if you're investing in larger or property down south, it's, you know, more expensive. You do need more money to start off with.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, and I think that's the thing, because we started off in an expensive area, and that's where we wanted to invest. So we had very specific criteria. We didn't want to be more than a kind of 45-minute drive from where we are. We live in Brighton, we're actually in Hove. And it said, well, we want to be able to invest in the area where we live. We didn't want to go up north. We wanted to be down south. So straight away it was like, we're buying high value properties. So we are, you know, from day one, we're talking quite large sums of money. So again, that was something to get our head around. In terms of those first couple of deals that we did, and when we started out, I mean, and I think this is what I would always say to people is, you know, start with people that you know. Really think about who are those people that you know. I mean, whether it's family members, close friends, then, you know, you've got that relationship there. Hopefully you've got that trust already, and then you can kind of build on that. So the very first deal that we did was actually my neighbour was our investor, and we did do that as a joint venture. And you know, I just was talking to her about what she's doing. She's a very positive, open-minded person, and so I was just telling her what we're doing. We just started Mastermind. I said, okay, and she said, well, how are you going to do it? And I said, well, you know, we're learning how to buy properties where we can add value, and then, you know, we can get higher cash flow, because we were focusing on the HMO strategy. So sort of explained that to her, and I said, and then how we're going to fund that is by working with investors. People will put money in, and we'll give them a really great return, and then we can do projects like that. And so she just thought that sounded great, and she was going to be, and she said, said, well, I've got this money, it's in stocks and shares, it's not doing that great. And she said, I was thinking of just buying like a studio flat for cash, but I wasn't going to get those kind of returns. I'd be really interested. And she said, and to be honest, I'd probably never get around to doing it. I don't think I'd be bothered. So we were able to show that actually if she put in her money and she came in a joint venture, that actually half of the property that we were doing was going to give her higher returns than her going out and buying like a studio flat, a single let, buy to let. So that was sort of how the first deal happened. That relationship was there. And then the next couple of investors was like a really good friend of my sister's who has some money, and he loaned us money. So these are the two different types. You've got doing the joint venture, and then you're doing the loans, and they both have their place and they both work really well. And there's certain situations where it makes much more sense to do a joint venture, and certain situations where it might make more sense to do a loan. And I think the key thing that, and again, there's something that comes up when I'm coaching and mentoring people, is just making sure that when you are the borrower, you're the person doing the work, and you work with investors, that you really do understand the kind of difference and what's involved in that. So if you're borrowing the money, you're taking 100% of the risk, and you've got to really acknowledge that, because you're saying to that person, I guarantee you that I'm going to give you this interest, and I also guarantee you that I'm going to pay you the money back in our agreed period of time, no matter what. So even if that project goes wrong, even if that project loses money, you're still liable to pay them 100% of that money back. So you're taking 100% of the risk. With the joint venture, you're sharing risk and reward. So, if they put the money in, then obviously you're saying to them, okay, you put the money in, like the sort of, a joint venture is a blank piece of paper. You can work it out at any kind of, in any way that you want. But the sort of classic one of the 50-50, you've got one person doing all the work, one person putting in the money, and you sort of essentially put equal value on those two things, because you're sharing the profits 50-50. But that investor is essentially loaning the JV relationship the money, so they are still owed that money back, but they're kind of parking it in the property, if you like. And then they will take 50% of whatever the profit is. So that could go up or down, if the cash flow isn't as high, or if there's void periods, then they'll take the hit as well as you, in terms of whether the cash flow will go up or down. Same with the equity, they get 50% of the equity uplift, but obviously if that property went down in value, then they will lose money as well as you. But you're still, and this is the other thing that people need sometimes miss. And sometimes it can be the people putting in the money as well. They think they're taking all of the risk when they're putting in the money, but you are actually still liable for 50% of the risk. So if there was a loss, you as the delivery partner, you're going to have to find 50% of that loss. You do still need to think about that, because you will still owe 50% of that loss, if that makes sense. And again, I think that's something, I don't want to get too detailed and technical here, but I think it is important. These things are important to think about.
Yeah,
that's essentially the difference between the two.
It's a good point. And did you find that it was easier than you thought at the beginning, or did it take a while to sort of practice talking to lots of different people about what the opportunities were?
I think it was, I don't know if easy is the right word. Because part of me thinks that, and this is, why I wanted to write this article for YPN, and why we're kind of having this conversation now. Part of me does think it is almost a bit too easy to borrow money. And I know people that just starting out will go, for God's sake, it's, good her saying that, she's like raised money, and they think, and then they're really struggling to fund their first deal and everything like that. But actually, once you get going, it is amazing, like how easy it can be. And obviously I'm not naming any names, but there's been some high profile cases where where companies have borrowed a lot of private investor money. They haven't managed it well, they haven't looked after that well, and they haven't been very responsible in doing so, and people have ended up losing money. But I think it was too easy for them to borrow that money in the first place, because once you get that reputation and that profile going, actually, you know, I get, you know, once I got going, you know, I would be having regular texts from people saying, I've got some money, can you do anything with it? And, you know, and that's, you know, it's a great position to be in, but, you know, in the words of Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And you really got to think about that. Just because people are offering you money, that, you know, you've got to really think carefully about, okay, should I be doing this? So in the beginning, because started people that I know, it was remarkably, I suppose, easy as kind of, we put a lot of effort in. I mean, I say the sort of the closing the investors was kind of the easy part, but we were only able to do that because of all the work that we'd done in terms of educating ourselves, in terms of like being able to be very clear on the numbers and all of that. So there was a lot of hard work involved in being in the situation to be able to present. But, you know, first and foremost, it is with working with investors, it is know, like, and trust. That is the first and foremost. And then, you know, and actually, so if you're quite personable, if you're good at building relationships, you know, then and then people trust you, then they're quite willing to work with you. So then, because of that, then you're the, in a sense, you're the one that's then got to go, well, I really need to think about doing this, making sure that I'm totally sure and I'm totally responsible in the way that I'm taking this money from people.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. So, because it maybe easy isn't right, or maybe it's more like straightforward. Once you do get to a certain point, you've got that credibility, you've got the track record, and, you know, you've educated yourself. You are in a position where, you know, you can make, you know, offer great returns to other people. But so let's cover that in both angles then. One from, you know, you as a borrower, and then, you know, what sort of due diligence should you be doing sort of on that person who's lending you the money, or the company's lending you the money? And let's flip it over to the other side if someone is.
Because both sides are really important. And actually, just to mention on the other side, I think a lot of emphasis is put on onto the responsibility of the lender to do their due diligence on the borrower, and obviously quite rightly so. If you're going to lend someone money, you should do your due diligence on them, and, you know, but on the flip side, you know, and people do that, and, you know, someone can have a great reputation and things can still go wrong. But like so it's coming back to like to address that first, as the borrower, what do you need to do? Well, yeah, your actual due diligence, that's a tongue twister for me for some reason, on the lender. So there's, I mean, obviously some key things. I mean, if you know them already and you've got that relationship, you know, then they fall into the kind of friend category, in terms of, like, we all know about the FCA regulation stuff that's come in, and so you do have to be very careful about soliciting for funds and advertising interest rates or specific returns and things like that. If you know the person, that doesn't stand quite as much, but you do want to as a borrower, you want to be understanding their situation, you know, like, you know, because really, in a way, you want to make sure that they know what they're doing, you know. So even if they're like someone that you know, that's a friend or family member, you want to be really clear that they actually fully understand what they're getting into, and be very wary of, like, taking someone's life savings, you know, for your project. So, you know, if they've got, you know, you still kind of really essentially want to be working with high net worth individuals, sophisticated investors. And we know that, I mean, obviously people can look that up, but, you know, someone that's considered to be a high net worth individual is someone that sort of earns over £100,000 a year in their job, or someone that has £250,000 of equity, not including their own home. That's kind of classes someone as a high net worth. And then a sophisticated investor, someone who has made I don't know all the details of it, but someone that's made specific investments and is used to investing and is knowledgeable about investing. So actually, you know, I think it's a good idea to work with those people anyway. If you are working with people that maybe don't have as much money, you know, and they are sort of maybe giving you smaller amounts, and it is like a big chunk of what they've got, then being really clear to them about what the risks are, and also just knowing in yourself that you have the means to pay them back, even if that project goes wrong, and but you talk them through, because everything has risk, that you talk them through, like, what are all the possible things that go wrong, and even the most unlikely things. You go and, well, look, at the end of the day, if the project goes wrong, this is how I'm going to pay you back. If that happens, so obviously in the circumstances where the whole property market crashes, isn't it? But we're all a bit screwed then anyway. But you've got, you kind of go, look, there are circumstances under which you could lose this money, and these are the circumstances, but this is what I've got in place. This is my situation. This is my financial situation, and this is how I would, in the event that this happened, that this thing went wrong, then this is my backup plan. This is what I would do. Yeah. So it's that. So it's being really clear with the investor what, telling them what their potential risks are. And I know in a sense, maybe it's down to them to kind of think about that. But I think as a borrower, I think it's very good to point all those things out. And then also just being super, super clear on your numbers. So so some of the mistakes, the pitfalls, really, some of the mistakes that people make is really, overestimating what the end value of a project's going to be, underestimating how long it's going to take. So, if you think about, I always say, if you're borrowing money from someone, you need to make sure that you are, again, if you're borrowing, you are, as I said before, you're taking 100% of the risk. Therefore, you have to be well prepared and willing to lose your own money before you will let an investor lose money. So you need to know that you've got the means to do that. So you need to be prepared to sell your own home, everything that you own, the shirt off your back, before you will let an investor lose money. And I think if you don't have that attitude, and if that's not what you think, then I don't think that, for me, I don't think that's responsible. And I think, if you're sort of thinking of trying to just protect your own assets and still borrow money from other people so that it's just their money's risk, then I don't think that's responsible and ethical. Unless you've got a specific project and it's, and there's very high returns and they're fully aware of what they're getting into. But I mean, we're talking about property projects where, you're borrowing the money to buy a property, and you're guaranteeing them that you're going to pay that back and give them the interest. Then it's like, okay, what happens if that project goes wrong? How are you going to pay them back? What if it gets downvalued? So there's a few things to think about, which I can go into.
There's so much to think about.
I know.
I'm trying to pick out the relevant,
terrifying people.
We look at it as a whole, then you've got the beginning, which is the preparation beforehand, doing your due diligence on the lender and the project, and making sure all your numbers are correct.
Yeah.
And then the ongoing managing, of the project, and making sure that you're responsible in terms of making sure it all goes well, and being realistic, the numbers not not being too optimistic, and the exits as well, and how you're going to pay them back. And then you've got two things there in terms of the things that you can control. So doing your due diligence and getting that GDV number more accurate, not being too optimistic. And then you've got the things that aren't in your control, like property market crash or COVID or whatever it might be. So in terms of borrowing responsibly, then, is there anything else that what else can we talk about in terms of how people can be mindful of?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a few. I think recognizing the pitfalls that some people fall into, and then thinking about what you can do to mitigate that. So as I said before, some of the things that people do, the mistakes that people make is as I say, sometimes overestimating what the end values are going to be, and underestimating how long things are going to take. So I think really stress testing your numbers. So really looking at, well, what's the worst, working off the worst case scenario figures, and then what would it look like if it did get down values, and then what's your kind of backup plan for repaying that investor if you don't pull out enough money to pay them. So some of the sort of key things to be really mindful of is with borrow money is making sure that you really allow for all of that invested interest within the project. So you actually borrow for a specific project. I think what can happen, and I think what maybe happened with some of these sort of high profile cases that went wrong, is that as it became very easy to borrow more and more money, I think people just like were land banking, or almost like land banking investor money. So, so an investor said, "Oh, I'll lend you 50,000," that, and not wanting to say no. So actually just going, "Okay, I'll borrow that because there's some projects in the pipeline." Yeah. And so actually borrowing money and investor money and having it sitting in the bank when there isn't actually a project going on. Well, so that's then accruing interest. Well, you've got to allow for paying that interest somewhere. So if you do your numbers on a deal and you've got your nice spreadsheet and you're going, "Okay, with that project, I'm going to buy it there, and once we buy it, it's going to take 6 months to refurb, and then it's going to take 3 months to refinance, so I only need the money for 9 months." Okay, but actually they haven't factored into that they might borrow the money 2 months before they exchange, because they want to have the money in the bank, and then factor in, and then if that happens, what if then the exchange gets delayed for another month? So that's another month of interest. And then what happens if the refinance gets delayed, and then that's another month of interest on that? So you've got to actually think about, even if the project, from the point you're buying it to the point you're refinancing, if you think that's 9 months, you've got to factor in, if you're holding that money for any length of time, that interest is accruing. So that has got to be allowed for within the project. Yeah. And if you're doing like an HMO, for example, the buy, refurb, refinance model that a lot of people are doing, I always like to allow for all of the interest within the development cost of that. So I don't think, "Oh, well, I'll just take it out of the cash flow later," so, and don't account for it. And I think sometimes people do that. So it's that's part of the development cost of that project. So you allow for all of that interest, and that's part of the cost. And then at the point that you refinance it, and if you've got some money left in and you're keeping some investor money long term, then the interest starts to come out of the cash flow at that point. So you've really got to think about how you're going to pay that interest, and then does the deal stack up when you take into account all of that interest? I'd also make sure that when you're borrowing money from people, it's like always borrow for longer than you think you're going to need it for. Another thing, people can be really optimistic about the timescales. It's like, "Oh yeah, you can lend me 50,000. I'm only going to need it for 6 months." And it's like, well, if you think you're only going to need it for 6 months, well, you like that. What an investor could go, "Oh, that's great. Oh, I can lend it to you for 6 months because it's sitting in the bank, and then I'm going to buy something." So if you know that they need it back after 6 months, then just don't borrow that money, because actually, if you think it's only going to take you 6 months, you want to borrow that money for maybe 12 months, like how long are they happy to leave it tied up for? So I'd always check with an investor, like, even before I've talked about how long a project might take, I'd be like, how long would you be happy for that money to be tied up and receiving that high interest for? And if they're saying like, well, 12, 18 months, and so say it was like, okay, well, say they said, "Right, I'd be happy to leave it tied up for 12 months," and so then I might say, "Well, I think the project might only take about 6 months, but let's make an agreement that it's up to 12 months, but I'll pay you back earlier if the money comes in, so that you are not having to pay all the interest up to 12 months. So you've got that option to pay it back early, but you're borrowing it for way longer than you think you need it." Yeah. So I think that is really important, because I think people have the attitude almost that people don't want to lend their money for that long. And in actual fact, it's like, why would they not want to, if they're getting a really good return, why would they want to do it for a short term? But on the flip side of that, what you need to also be careful of is borrowing the money really long term, just assuming that you're going to have another project to roll it over into, because you could then go, they go, "Yeah, well, I'm happy to lend you the money for 3 years." Well, then, if you're borrowing that for one project, and then you've got that, and then that money comes back to you, and then it takes you 3-4 months to get another deal. Well, then you've got all of that money sitting there, you've got to pay that interest. So that's another danger. So I always like to think about, I'm borrowing the money for a specific project, and then ideally paying that back at the end of the project. And then the chances are, you know, if you've got another project anyway, that same investor is just going to want to relend you. You know, sometimes you will have multiple projects, so it can work to roll that over, but I think you always want that option to kind of pay it back. Or you can borrow it very long term if it's for a specific project that you know that then that actual project can pay out for that length of time, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just having that demarcation of like, this money is for this project, I think is really important. And with that, then, you know, you've got certain terms with that project, with that specific loan. And then, you know, if you choose to re-borrow that money, or the lender chooses to lend again, and then it's on a different project, that should be a completely separate contract, right? So do you want to talk about contracts and how, you know, they're really important to have, and how to go about, you know, getting a specialist solicitor to draw them up and making sure that, you know, everyone's happy with all of the terms in the
contract? I mean, I think the first thing when you speak to investors, like really, you know, working out what their criteria is, what they're looking to achieve, and, you know, and also that might determine whether you go down the loan route or the JV route. And we didn't actually talk about the due diligence for the investor needs to do, so we can come back. That was the second part of the you asked before, wasn't it? So we need to touch on that. But in terms of contracts, is, you know, you first of all do like a heads of terms, you know, where you agree. Sorry, my cat's meowing outside. Where you just agree the terms of that, and then get the contract drawn up by a solicitor. I mean, if it's like straightforward loan, you might get it drawn up by a solicitor, and then you might use that loan agreement again. I mean, the benefit obviously of using solicitor each time is that then gets registered with the solicitor, and they've got some kind of liability in terms of like the having drawn up the contract and stuff if there was any issues. So I always get like loan agreements drawn up by a solicitor. Obviously a JV agreement is a slightly different thing. If you're going to have a company, if you're going to do something in a company with a JV partner, then you might have a shareholders agreement. But the best thing is just, I think people are scared to speak to solicitors, or they want to scrimp on agreements, or but I think you just have a conversation with the solicitor, and you want to pay for contracts. Don't try and get a loan agreement off someone else, get a loan agreement specifically to you. And then obviously if you've got an investor that you work with regularly, so some of the investors that just reinvest with me all the time, we'll reuse similar contracts and just edit it ourselves, and they're comfortable with that. So I think that. And in terms of anything else on the contract side, any other questions?
I think it's just important. Some people just either they're downloading something from somebody on Facebook, or they're not doing it. They're not borrowing responsibly. I guess it's that, doesn't it? Of just operating your business professionally. This isn't a hobby, and you're not just even I want to say, even if you're borrowing from a friend or family, but actually, in a lot of cases, it's just as important, if not more, to get that contract in place, because then everyone's on the same page. It's crystal clear. It's in black and white. There can't be any, I thought you meant this and I thought you meant that. It's a terrible just a thought for anyone's money to kind of be lost on a project. But if you've got a relationship and you've got family members and things, it just can be very more complicated.
Well, exactly. I mean, you want the relationship there, and obviously the benefit of a friend or family member is that you have got that relationship. There is the know, like, and trust thing there, but trust. I mean, trust is the number one most important thing, but it's not enough. You've got to have the paperwork to back it up, because people, even with the best will in the world, can start out with the best intentions, and then things can go wrong and snowball and all of that. So the trust is the most important thing to have in place. I mean, if you're going on to this kind of due diligence of the lender, if you feel any kind of inkling that you don't trust that person that you're about to lend money to, then just don't do it. Don't go, well, I don't really trust them, so I'll just make sure to have all the paperwork in place. No, you have to 100% trust them first, then make sure you have all the paperwork in place. It's not just like, but they're giving really good returns, therefore, or I've got a bad, so sometimes when things have gone wrong, quite often there might have been a little niggle, or there might have been something where you're not really sure about the person, and it's like, well, if you've got that, then just don't. There are plenty of people out there that you can work with, that, so I say, like, first of all, you have to definitely trust them and 100% believe that they've got integrity, they're doing the right thing, and they are, that what they're telling you is true. It doesn't mean that it is, because obviously people can make stuff up. But then you go, so you've got to have that feeling first, and then you make sure you've got the paperwork to back up. And then in terms of the other due diligence from the lender's point of view is, you've got to establish your own, like, risk, appetite for risk in terms of what security you're happy to take. You might decide that you're only going to lend someone if you get first charge, which is obviously the best security you can get. But that's hard to do, because you're only going to get the first charge as if you're going to lend a lot of money, and you'd essentially acting as the mortgage lender. So that's when you're then lending the money instead of the mortgage. So the chances are that's going to be lower interest. You have to have large sums of money to be able to get the first charge. You can do joint first charge things, which I won't go into in more details. They're a little bit more complex, but that can work quite well. And then the other thing, of course, is personal guarantees. So that would be the next stage. You can obviously sometimes get second charges, but usually the first charge lender doesn't allow it. So that can be very difficult. Unless it's a development, you might be able to. But the danger of just going and getting a second charge is, if something goes wrong with that project and your security is just second charge, then obviously the first charge lender is going to get paid, and you might not. So if you're going second charge, then I would say you want to get a personal guarantee as well as that. And then you've got just the personal guarantee, which is an unsecured loan, which is, when I've worked with investors, the majority of the loans I've worked with investors have been sort of unsecured and with a personal guarantee. So that is the security, is my personal guarantee. And then, of course, that has to be worth the paper that it's written on.
Yeah.
So I'll say that obviously if you're lending someone, you then really want to understand their financial situation. You can do some searches. I suppose at the very least you can go on Companies House. You can sort of do, have they had financial problems? Have they ever been bankrupt? Because there may be little things that send up red flags on their history. But you want them to tell you everything, and then you can sort of do some background checks and do some Companies House checks and all of that. And then you really want to go what assets, what's the sort of assets and liabilities they've got. So do they own properties already? What's the portfolio? And you really want to understand, well, what's their debt level and what's their equity level. So their sort of their net worth, is the difference between what's the value of their assets compared to how much debt they've got on the assets. Now, obviously, you can get confirmation of the first charge debt, but you've got to take their word for it. And when they tell you how many other loans investors got personal guarantee, because you've got no way of knowing. So if I'm giving someone the details on my assets and liabilities, I've got a list and I go, right, and this is how much, and this is how many loans I've got for unsecured loans from other investors in my portfolio. So that's then accounted for within all of my debt. So then you can say, well, this is all my assets, this is all my debt, including the unsecured debt. But that could be made up. It could, at the end of the day, that you haven't really got any way of knowing. So again, that's where the trust element of it comes in. Really is that you've kind of got to trust that they're telling the truth. And then you've got to feel if you're comfortable with that. And it might be that you're not comfortable with that, and that's fine. So that's one side of it, just on the actual borrower themselves. And then the other side is like, well, the project that you're lending them money for. So even if you're lending money, then that you're not sharing in the profits of that deal, but you still want to know how good the deal is, because you want to see what's the ceiling above, the more profit they're making, the better. So it doesn't matter, because sometimes borrowers are like, they don't want to share how much profit they're making with an investor they're borrowing money, because they're like, oh, well, if they see how much profit I'm making, they're going to want more. And it's like, well, not really, because your profit could go down, and actually the more profit you're making, the better, because then the safer their money is, because you want to see like how much profit there is above. If they're lending you unsecured, you've got the mortgage debt and all of that, you've got their their money. So the higher the profit margin is above that, the better for them, because it's like, you know, and then it's like, well, if they wanted more profit, then they could go out and do that themselves, and then they're not going to, because they're, you know, so that's, so, you know, it's, I mean, I'd say don't be worried as the borrower, don't be worried about sharing how much profit you're going to make, because at the end of the day, you're offering what you're offering, and they can take it or leave it. You know, they can say, well, I think I should get more, and you can go, well, actually, no, in this situation, because I'm borrowing, I am taking 100% of the risk, because I'm borrowing that money from you, and I'm going to guarantee you pay you back. And if, you know, if anything went wrong with that project, then it's me that takes the hit. You know, I mean, I have had projects, you know, where we've done more like buy to sell stuff. I've had projects where, you know, and this was sort of, you know, earlier on, and like making mistakes and stuff. I've had projects where where it's been like a buy to sell, and it's gone on so long that the bridging interest, the investor interest, I've got to the point where I actually like have ended up making no money out of that deal, because of all the things that I'm saying now that I didn't have that foresight at that time. So I'm trying to sort of teach people, like, even from like mistakes that I've made, the investors didn't lose money. Of course they didn't, because I wouldn't let that happen. But so they got way more, you know, even though they were getting maybe a fixed interest rate, because the project wasn't maybe as good as we thought it was, it just took longer, we had issues with planning and all of that, then the situation is that that fixed interest actually got them a lot more money than what I made out of the project. And you just take that on the chin, you know. It's like, that's just the way that it is.
Yeah.
So in terms of like, so I'm going back and forth between investor and borrower, because I think, you know, it is a bit of back and forth. So from that point of view, as the lender, so I'd say that's the due diligence bits you want to do. So this could be difficult for people starting out, because you go, well, that's all very well, you know, like talking about assets and liabilities and having that equity. So it's like, well, what if you are just starting out and you don't have, if your personal guarantee isn't worth the paper it's written on? I mean, I was lucky in the situation in when I was starting out, because so I didn't have any money to invest, but I did, my husband and I we do have a home, and we have a home and we had quite a lot of equity in that house. We'd like got on the property ladder in London like years before, and we'd moved down to Brighton. So we had quite a high value house with a relatively low mortgage. So I had a lot of equity in that house. We weren't actually able to release any of that because our income wouldn't allow us to at that time. But it was, at least I knew I had that. So at least I knew I had that money, and I don't know how comfortable I would have felt borrowing money from people if I didn't know that, or at least I would have been like, this is my situation. You know, you don't have to lend me money. It's completely your choice, but you have to understand that I'm giving you a personal guarantee. So you know, so I was able to go, I'll give you a personal guarantee. This is how much equity I've got in my own house. So if that project goes wrong, I will sell my house, because I'm building my property business, and that's what that's the risk that I'm taking.
Yeah.
So
it's in your credibility.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's important there, you mentioned about basically being transparent and that communication. Yeah. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's, you know, that's all you can be responsible for is your own integrity, your own, you know, just being transparent and authentic about what you're doing. And then it's up to the lender if they want to lend based on those terms. So to kind of wrap up, do you want to just should we finish off by talking about the communication? And you mentioned there about projects don't go to plan. Not necessarily they go wrong, but they don't go to plan, and you end up having to, you know, keep them rather than selling them. So that communication with the lender, then, you know,
yeah, I mean, I think
put their heads in the sand, don't they? A lot of the time, think, oh, it's not going to plan. Like, I'm not sure what to say.
A visitor.
Hello.
This is Chica. Yeah, I mean, I think communication is absolutely key. So you want to stay, you know, you want to keep your investors updated regularly. I mean, just a quick thing on, just to finish up the point on you're borrowing the money, and if you don't have the assets and stuff like that, that's where I would say to people, maybe think about doing joint ventures. You know, initially, if you don't have the assets, you know, maybe look at joint ventures where they do have a share in the asset that you're buying. You know, if you don't have the assets to really underwrite a loan situation. So that's something to think about. So then coming on to the, like, you know, so always like think about preempting things that go wrong. So if you do have a project and you have borrowed money for a certain length of time, and then you can see actually this is going to overrun. So maybe you have only borrowed the money for 6 months or 8 months, and something's gone wrong, you know, like COVID, you know, or you know, the market's pretty slow with refinancing and all of that. Then it's just, don't leave it until the day before you're meant to pay the loan back and say, oh, I need to extend the loan, or kind of an extension, because that's just going to send panic into the investor, you know, and go, well, what the hell's going on? Because you've probably known for some time that it might run over. So it's like, so that's a case of people burying their head in the sand and just thinking, oh, you know, oh God, I can't deal with this. So I say, like, if you think it's going to run over, you're probably going to have like a month or 2 months notice of that, where it looks like. So I'd always be going to the investor well in advance and going, look, here's the situation, this is what we've done, this bit's taken longer because we had this issue with the build, or the refinance is going to take longer. Would you be happy to extend the loan? If, you know, at the point, it looks like we probably won't be able to pay the loan back on the date agreed. Are you happy for the money to be tied up a bit longer? And then you would go, and then what's the longest, you know, just say, like, again, I think you know, I think it'll be delayed like by a couple of months or whatever it is, but what's the longest you'd be happy for that money to be tied up, just so that I don't want to be coming back to you again and asking for another extension. So let's do that early. So very much that, preempting. And then if you do it early enough and they say, do you know what, no, I really need it back because I'm doing a project, then you know, that gives you enough time to find another investor to replace them. So it's always thinking ahead and always thinking about the backup plans, for because you don't want to be ever in a situation where that investor needs the money and you're not able to pay it back. So you want to have multiple options for dealing with that.
Yeah, I think that keyword is there, multiple options of, you know, not just one investor to back it up, but if for any reason something goes wrong with that investor, then, you know, somebody else, ideally somebody who has shown a commitment, they've transferred part of the money in advance. Even if you've got an overlap of a month or two, it's much better to have that ready to go in the bank. Great. Well, any kind of final thoughts then, in terms of, obviously, you know, you do your own coaching and mentoring. Any final thoughts for people who are looking to borrow money responsibly? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's, you know, I think there is a lot to it. I think it's like, you know, I don't want to terrify people. You know, I think it can be an amazing thing to have a, you know, a relationship with an investor and have that, like, a long-term relationship that's really mutually beneficial to both of you. You're providing them with amazing value, they're providing you with amazing value, and you'll be able to facilitate something for each other that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do on your own, which is really an amazing thing. So I think, you know, I think it's something that, you know, it's a great thing to do. So I wouldn't say, you know, I think people that say, oh, never borrow money, I don't agree with that. I think you can do it. And I think the key thing is to just be responsible, to build that relationship, to be honest, and to hold on to things lightly as well. Like, I always, something that I always share with all my coaching clients is, whatever, if they're getting overwhelmed or if they're getting really attached to a deal or work with an investor, what I always say to them is, like, have high intention and low attachments. It's a bit of a kind of woo-woo spiritual kind of attitude, but I really like it, and it really syncs with people. So always have the high intention of what you're doing, but don't be super attached to the outcome, because then that's when you come across desperate, and, you know, and just like build those relationships. So you've got those, you know, you've got those multiple options that we talked about, and just really make sure that you know what you're doing. So learn, get educated.
Definitely, or work with other people who are, you know, more
exactly,
experienced than you, and
don't be afraid. Like, I don't like this idea of giving away. You're giving away deals, or you're giving away equity. It's like, so it's certainly in the beginning, you know, think about doing joint ventures, and I like doing a mix of joint ventures and loans. I think that works really well, especially in high value areas, expensive areas where we are, where actually we do deals where there's quite a lot of money left in after we've added a lot of value and we get great cash flow, but there's quite a lot of money left in. So they work brilliantly with a joint venture partner who's happy to park money long term, and then you've not got that pressure of how you're going to pay them back. So I think a mix of doing that, but again, you've got lots to think about, which we don't have time to go into, on all the things to think about when you're going into a joint venture, because it is, it's not to be taken lightly.
Part two.
Part two, we have to do that. Yeah, there's so much more to say, but yeah.
There is, and obviously so much, more that you've been up to as well, and
yes.
your journey. So, just kind of give people some direction where they can find out more about yourself, what you're up to, your coaching, mentoring.
I'm on LinkedIn. You can contact me on Facebook. Just private message me on Facebook. I do some mentoring. I don't do a huge amount. I like to, very much for me, it's all about lifestyle and having time, but I do some coaching and mentoring, so that, that's potentially something I'd be able to help people with. If anyone's interested to chat to me, just probably the best way to get me is messaging on Facebook.
Right, and I'd add to that, just mention that you've heard about Carly on the YPN podcast, so it's not just a random request.
Yes,
plenty of them. So great. Okay, we'll put the links to all those social media links in the show notes.
Yeah. I don't have a website at the moment, and I'm getting one sorted out. Actually, after all these years, that's the thing, because all the people that invested, it's all been like word of mouth and just building relationships and stuff. So it's never kind of ended up coming through, that way. So it's like I've never sort of had that need to do it, but
well, it means you've been focusing on the right things then, Carly.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, it's been lovely to have you on. I look forward to reading your article in the October YPN issue.
Thank you. Love to speak to Michelle, as ever. Take care. Bye.
And for anyone who is listening and is not yet a subscriber to the magazine, please click the link in the show notes for your free 30-day trial. See you next time, guys.